Okay, welcome everybody. We're very excited to have you join us at this innovation rally. My name is Brian Ritchie, and I am the Vice President, the John and Kathy Martin Vice President and Associate Provost of Innovation at the University of Notre Dame. For those of you that don't know anything about the Idea Center, we are the organization that does all of the commercialization and the licensing, the startups, the entrepreneurship, the innovation, also entrepreneurship education at the University of Notre Dame. We basically take all of the discoveries from the faculty and also work with students and alums and community and commercialize those discoveries and take those to market. We have been doing this now since 2017, and over the last 3.5 or so years have created 111 companies in all kinds of different industries and in all kinds of different areas. And if for any reason you find that interesting and would like to engage with us, we would love to talk with you about how you might get engaged with us in that process or how we might help you. Normally, we would have these innovation rallies in person and we would feed you lunch. And it would actually even be a good lunch. But at this point in time, given COVID, that is not something that we can do. So we've been doing these online. When we first started doing these online, I have to admit we were a little nervous because we had a very good track record of every time we had one of these innovation rallies, the football team would win. And so we were pretty sure, and still are, that the innovation rallies are the reason that the football team wins. And so, Helen, I don't mean to put pressure on you, but we're hoping to keep that streak alive at this point. So this is all about us getting together and enjoying a little time, listening to successful entrepreneurs and their experience as they've built their companies and as they have grown their enterprises. One other thing that we thought we would do to get you in the spirit and make you feel a little bit like you're in town is to have the Notre Dame Glee Club kick off our innovation rally. We know that normally you'd be attending the football game and might see some of this, but due to social distancing rules cannot. So we'd like to share a little bit of the campus with you, and we'll start with the Notre Dame Glee Club now, and we'll end one with one at the end. Nick, take it away.
Oh, me name's I'm the leader of the land. Although few in numbers, we're the finest in the land. We play waits and weddings and at every fancy ball. And when we play at funerals, we play the martial song. Oh, the drums go bang, the cymbals clang, the horns they blaze away. May God he wants the old soon, while I the pipes we play. And Tennessee troops, the flute and the music is something grand. A credit to old Ireland is McInerney's land. Right now we are rehearsing for a very swell affair. The annual celebration, all the gentry will be there. When General Grant to Ireland came, he took me by the hand. Says he, I never saw the likes of McInerney's land. Oh, the drums go bang, the cymbals swang, the horns they blaze away. May God he wants the older soon, while I the pipes to play. And Tennessee troops, the flute and the music is something grand. A credit to old Ireland is McInerney's. In the merry month of June, accompanying all my started death, the girls of Doomers, the baby broken hearts, of looted father dear, the mystery darling mother drank a pint of beer, and Greek and Diggs his brother, then off to reap the corn, and leave where I was born, and cut us out like corn to banish ghosts, and gobble and land, new barrel grows, and rats with all the folks, fighting all the dogs on the rocky road, to double in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, onto the hair and turn her down the rocky road, and all the way to double and whack for all it up. I thought it such a pity to be so soon deprived of you with that fine city. When I took a stroll among the quality, we found a little stone in a neat locality. Something crossed me mind, then I looked behind, no bundle could I find. On we say, go up and inquiring for the road, they said my corner road wasn't much in more than the rocky road. To double in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, onto the hair and turn her down the rocky road, and
Fantastic. Let us set some ground rules before we get started here really quickly. Because this is a webinar, neither we as speakers nor the other attendees can hear or see you. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature within the Zoom app, and we'll spend some time in the last half of this webinar, and Helen will answer those questions. If you use the chat, we may not see it at all based on the way that this is set up, so please use the Q&A. We're very fortunate today to have with us Helen Adeosun, who is the CEO and founder of CareAcademy and has had a career in driving outcomes for adult learners. She has firsthand experience as a caregiver and has worked with Teach for America, Boston Public Schools, and Pearson Education, as well as a number of companies focused on caregiving issues. She holds a BA from the University of Notre Dame in politics and Arabic studies. And she also has a master's in education from Harvard University, focused on education policy and management. Helen was recently recognized as Fortune Magazine's 40 Under 40 in healthcare. And we're extremely glad to have you here. Welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining us today.
Brian, thank you so much. I'm really happy. I'm very excited to be here.
It's fantastic. Well, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your journey. Love to hear about the company that you founded, CareAcademy. What is it? What does it do? And how did you get where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like a lot. So I'll even try to parse that down. And if folks on the call have any questions, feel free to definitely send those to Brian and the team of the Idea Center. And I'll also say, I'll preface this too, in that I try to keep a lot of any of what I have to say very practical. I think that there's definitely a lot of excitement right now around entrepreneurship and what that means. And I want to provide a very full and gracious view, because a lot of what I have done is by grace of what my journey looks like and means. So I try not to sugarcoat and provide very applicable and practical advice as you all are on your journeys or will embark on your journeys. So again, I also want to start off by saying thank you so much to the Idea Center for reaching out. I've been just phenomenally impressed by you all being such a great resource to entrepreneurs, and if anything, entrepreneurs are always in need of resources. So thank you for reaching out. And my journey, I'll really kind of distill down. I am a child of immigrants. My parents emigrated from Nigeria back in the 80s as students themselves, and so in healthcare. And so it's funny because I was running away from healthcare only to run right back into it in a lot of ways. But grew up in Atlanta. And one of the things that I think was really a part of my development as an entrepreneur is the fact that I had a father who is, one, very deeply Catholic. So that's also one of the reasons I ended up at Notre Dame. But then also always asked us questions, right? And really made us very early on, speak cogently about what we believe in, and also, ask questions and further research. So my parents raised a nerd, if anything, but I think that's a key pillar of entrepreneurship, is sort of being able to, I think there are different iterations of this. People say, feel certain pain points, or, understanding why certain things are the way that they are. But I think it's just genuine love of curiosity. A love of curiosity will carry you far, even if you come up with a solution, asking how that solution can be better, if that's the only solution. So, I mean, growing up, my parents were in healthcare. My mom was a nurse. A lot of my family members were either doctors or nurses, and that's still the case to this day. And I really took to heart the impact of education. Nigerians are very enterprising and also very education focused. And so I was always told to sort of focus in school. I always went to public schools, and I saw really firsthand how education can really be a stepping stone. And so I asked a lot of, even very early on, a question of how do I sort of get involved from a perspective of thinking about how people can access education in ways in which they can make it a stepping stone for themselves. And then, really long story short, as I was growing up, I look for ways in which I could work. And so I spent some time providing caregiving services, whether it was at Notre Dame or whether it was in graduate school or even growing up, and was already asking questions about how I can make myself better, right? I went to the I attended the University of Notre Dame from 2003 to 2007, made a lot of really great friends, and kept asking why, why were things a certain way, and how I could make an impact on the world. And I remember actually, I don't know if it's still there, I hope it's still there, but I was walking down one night down O'Shaughnessy, because I was a political science major. I was walking down O'Shaughnessy and I looked to my left and there's this woman who's smiling and bright. I don't think it's even the same poster, but the tagline of the poster said, in 2 years, you won't even recognize yourself. And so I thought that was really profound, and then found out that the organization behind that poster was an organization called Teach for America. I was already very active in and around campus, and so by my junior year, I started thinking about it, and I really wanted to take all of the questions and the opportunities and the things that I learned, and just even a thing that I think I cultivated at Notre Dame around a heart for service, and applied to Teach for America and got in, and went back to Atlanta to teach high school. And I think taking a further look, that is also when I really was introduced to, there's a difference between being really in something and outside something. My experience obviously as a student in public education was very different, kind of looking from the teacher's perspective, and I really gained a very, very healthy respect for the folks who are doing and who've been lifelong educators, really in the midst of having and in many cases not having. And I also started asking myself a deeper question around education and just sort of a general admiration for what education could mean. A lot of my kids did not have, access on an ongoing basis to what their life would look like beyond the 4 years. We spend a lot of time in education talking about the primary years, but we kind of let people drift off on their own, once they hit 14. And again, it's by grace that I had a lot of people who were in my life as a 14-year-old to an 18-year-old who really sort of guided me to the point where I got to a place like Notre Dame. So started asking even deeper questions around, again, accessibility, around what your life looks like, once you hit high school and beyond, and how do we make education more accessible? And then, found myself in DC working for a number of organizations that looked at accessibility issues. And I, at the same time, this was sort of at the beginning of the Obama era, was learning about, different ways to utilize technology. And so I actually learned to use technology on the job. And so what we could now call social media at that point was called new media. And so how to utilize that, how to utilize technology in order to provide access. And so I started getting a little bit of the startup bug while working in DC and asking those questions, and decided to that I may be best oriented in policy to answer some of the questions that I'd always asked. And that led me to where I'm at today in Boston, but namely my degree program at Harvard, asking those questions at the same time that there's even more of a technology pull here in Boston. Boston is definitely a technology and healthcare hub. The master's program that I was a part of was a one-year program. It was also the same year that Harvard opened up something very similar in parallel to the Idea Center. It was called basically the Innovation Lab at Harvard. And so I was part of the first set and cohort of people who were asking questions, who were entrepreneurially leaning, that was a part of the iLab, and what the nascent piece of what became CareAcademy came from having the resources of, that opportunity. So much so that by the time I graduated in May, decided that I was going to do as much as I could to really orient to building the solution that I would have probably gone to DC and written policy papers on. And there's nothing against writing policy papers and legislation. That's really, really, really important. But decided to focus my efforts on building a solution because I didn't see one that really talks about and really speaks to the kind of scale and effort that I think it'll take. And so what we have now is from that, and I can talk more at length about kind of the trajectory of building CareAcademy, but I built out initial MVPs. I built out some of our initial first classes, and then started building and cultivating a team. And I think practical advice, number 2, asking questions was the first one. I'm a teacher, so humor me. The second one is really about cultivating narrative. I think in the startup world, we call that your pitch, but really it's not just your pitch, it's actually before that. It's your story, who you are, and who you are relative to what you're trying to build or solve for. I have said in many forums that I believe that narrative is the first currency of entrepreneurship, right? It's because the narrative and the grain of sand of the narrative that you talk about in terms of what exists today, the problem, who you are, why you're passionate about the certain problem, is what then begets the pearl that is a company. And so it's building a set of stakeholders. So in the span of when I graduated from my master's program in 2012 and what CareAcademy is today and will continue to be in 2020, it was building a set of stakeholders, including advisors that became investors. It was also building, the first set of mentors who became employees. But that narrative and the reason why they should care and they should work with you because they're going to give some part of, themselves to you, whether it's their, as my pastor says, time, talent, or treasure, is very much, what you have to start cultivating as an entrepreneur, and I really believe in. So I can let people ask questions from there, very specific ones, but I tend to speak in very broad strokes, but want to always get practical. And it's just, there've been a lot of ups and downs, and I'm happy to talk about, any of those too. But we're at this point, we're 40 people. We are primarily in Boston, but spread throughout. We have about 1,000 customers throughout the US and Canada. And we have, at this point, in the midst of COVID, which has, presented some challenges and really opportunities specifically because of what we provide, have skilled 200,000 people and growing. But we essentially provide online professional development for direct care workers. It is my belief and the vision that drives the company is that direct care workers are becoming part of the healthcare ecosystem, and nowhere is that more writ large than the moment that we're in COVID, that we're increasingly seeing something that has developed out over the last decade here in the US healthcare system. It's just value-based care, right? Care that is more compassionate, care that is more efficient and cost-effective, and care that essentially, harkens back to the day where you're the town doctor, made house calls to your grandparents. We're going back to the future in a lot of ways in terms of healthcare. And so CareAcademy is enabling that by helping folks learn how to provide healthcare services outside of the four walls of a hospital or outside of, a doctor or nurse. And so, our goal is to be the best company doing that. And we've got really great signals, but for me, that's all more proof in the pudding. I think in this moment that, we could definitely have a lot to build on, but I'm happy to answer any questions around anything else that folks may have questions around.
Yeah, let me ask you a quick question on that. So you identified this unique opportunity. Is the customer the hospital systems themselves, or is the customer the actual people who want to be providers? Are you selling kind of B2C, B2B? And how did you
Great
identify?
question. We're a B2B company, and that was actually a strategic opportunity as well. There is a lot of fragmentation in our market, but the market is coalescing in a lot of ways, right? There's a lot of M&A or mergers and acquisition that's happening within the industry, one. Two, there are more technologies, right? So there's this, I don't know if there are folks familiar with healthcare, but one of the biggest mergers that was announced in the midst of the pandemic is between two companies, Teladoc and Livongo, that have been rocket ships, especially because of the moment that we're in. Those technologies, in many ways, actually are then pushing down services into the home. And also there's a need to enable people. So Livongo relies, for instance, on health coaches to provide, diabetes interventions and different chronic and health comorbidities interventions in the home. So what we're essentially doing as a company is enabling sort of the human force to be able to catch up with the technology, right? You still need people as an intervention in many ways. And so we are a B2B company. We work primarily with home care agencies and franchisors. That is rapidly expanding for us just because of the moment that we're in as well. But we work primarily with the employers. And then the users and the learners, as we call them, are folks who are employees on behalf of the employers.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I love the way you started your conversation by talking about grace. I think that many entrepreneurs don't recognize the role that, whatever you want to call it, serendipity, providence, grace, luck, that it's being, there's something about being in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear more about what you think that looked like. You talked a little bit about some of that, but on the other side, the other interesting part of this is that there's something about the scrappiness. We talk about the willingness to apply and make stuff happen, build things out of nothing. And in fact, there's a new fund now in Silicon Valley you may be aware of that only funds immigrants because they're saying that immigrants they have this mindset, right? I mean, they have this growth mindset. And most of us can trace our roots back to an immigrant in not too many generations back. And talk a little bit, if you will, about what impact has that had in your life to be, that close to an immigrant family, at the same time recognizing just the fortunate of being in the right place, maybe having that grace. How's that come together for you? I'd be interested in having you expound on that.
Beautiful question. That's a very well-framed question, Brian. I think I am more, I listen to entrepreneurial stories, and I think also because narrative is a currency, get rich on listening to other people's stories, right? And so it's like part of the reason I love the Bible is great stories, right? I love stories. So, I think in my mind, I have to humble myself because I think grace sort of, there's a place where, that idea of someone becoming that overnight success, where I think there's grace in getting up to that, and then also sort of grace beyond for me. I say that because I think that CareAcademy could not have existed in the way that it exists and have the energy around us in the way that we do 15 years ago, right? Just because there was a different notion around education, the technology was much more expensive, and healthcare was not as bending and as flexible in terms of thinking of itself. I also think that there's a moment in the last 6 months, if I'd be really honest, where we have gained a lot of ground. But I say that in technology, I don't care whose story you read and all those narratives and how they spin them, there's no such thing as an overnight success, right? I started this company and the nascency of this company around 2011, 2012 is its formal incorporation. And grace there in terms of getting to the right place at the right time is also persistence to be able to do that, right? There were a lot of hard moments of my very well-intended and wonderful Nigerian parents and family being like, You've got the shiny Harvard degree, you've got this shiny Notre Dame degree. We have no clue what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it. You just go to law school already and be a lawyer and just call it a day, and go make a 6-figure salary. Why are you expending so much energy in creating something like that doesn't exist, right? And I think it's also because they're well-intended, loving parents and family members sort of on the outside. And the most important thing you have to take care of, and I'm 35 years old and I'm just really realizing the importance of taking care of it, is the thing right here. Not just in terms of your ability to think and process, but your mindset as well, right? Because the job of the entrepreneur is so insane in that you're saying that, the thing that you want to build in the world does not exist. And by, hell or high water, by your hands and providence and grace, it is going to be built, right? It will exist, and it will exist in forms, if you're fortunate enough, and that's your storyline, in ways that you can't even imagine it, right? And so for me, it's also calls to task, we're enjoying a lot of fruits, and I'm seeing things that I couldn't have imagined, I think, even projected in CareAcademy. We're trying to lean into those things. But I will never make the mistake of ignoring the, 8 years previous where, it was a lot of tinkering and ideation and just a desire to understand more how people would utilize the technology and how we would do it, and learning the skills, because I didn't have all the requisite skills. And I don't think any entrepreneur should rest easy in thinking they do. They don't. How do you do practical things like fund a business, right? And so before the fancy $13 million of VC funding, we had moments where it was angels, it was pre-selling, right? And that was a tactic where, because I come from a very scrappy, entrepreneurial and also immigrant family, it's like, you have to believe in the story, and how do we make ends meet until we can get to that point. And so I took an early phone and recorded some of those first classes. I edited some of CareAcademy's classes, and I often joke, but in all seriousness, I've done every single job within CareAcademy before someone showed up better than me and that I hired to do it. And so it's again goes back to that first currency, because in that first currency of narrative is also the will for grace and the will for persistence until you get to that point, right? If I'd given up in 2015 and 2016, and trust me, there were definitely those moments, we wouldn't have been really at this point, and really sort of enjoying the fruit of providence and grace, really in CareAcademy and in my life. So I'll often say persistence. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the stories. There are no overnight successes, right? Yeah,
that
I don't know if that answers the question.
persistence there is so interesting, because it's the really interesting question is the same one that I think your parents were asking, which is, wow, shiny Notre Dame degree, shiny Harvard degree, you can easily go be a lawyer, you can easily make 6 figures, and you and I both know what it feels like in that 2015, 2016, you're in the trenches, things are hard, you don't know where this is going to take you. And at that point in time, when you say, yeah, maybe I should just go back and, do the law school thing already, or go be a lawyer already, or whatever, that says a lot about your willingness to believe in yourself. And by the way, we run into a lot of entrepreneurs who give up at that point, and don't push through, right? And don't get across to that other side. And part of me thinks about this, you just said, hey, I just raised $13 million in an A round. And by the way, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment that is very difficult to get through to. But as you know, in entrepreneurship and in starting companies, first of all, this is not something that is widely inclusive of different peoples, right? And it's hard. It's very hard to get the right connections. It's hard to get the right stories. It's hard to get the right valuations. Talk to us a little bit about how you got over that and how that happened for you, because I'm sure it was a little excruciating, but I'd love to hear it.
It was excruciating, and you know, I'd be remiss, and I never want to shy away from it, because I think the first responsibility of entrepreneurs, and talking to, I'll project it onto you all, other entrepreneurs, is being very real. And by the way, I'll just, before I answer that, we'll speak to, actually, I think it is also an answer to that, Brian, great question, is cultivating peer communities. It's something I took for granted, right? Because I was reading the hype, and entrepreneurship is sort of built as this sort of solo, you know, you're a rock star. It is never in terms of grouping or community. It is by oneself, right? Elon Musk, and it is the, you know, but what you'll find if you dig a little further is that, you know, Elon Musk has several peer groups where he reaches out to these folks, like, because he's struggling with something, or he needs some level of, you know, affirmation. And so to this day, Jeff Bezos has, you know, a very cultivated select group of people that he talks with. And so at every step of your entrepreneurial journey, find yourself in community and with peers. And that really actually is also the answer to, you know, the short answer to the nuances of what you said is I have hungered and I desired and created peer communities, because the long and short of it is, as a woman of color, as a Black woman, you know, statistics already sort of bear out, you know, what my likelihoods are. I mean, just one, venture is hard for anyone, right? We're talking about 1% of all enterprises in the US actually successfully gain some level of, you know, VC backing, right? This is very atypical. And then even further dipping into that, when you sort of slice out your segments, you know, almost 0.0006 or whatever, the almost, you know, in relative terms, 0% is provided to Black and brown women. And so for me, the answer also to that was developing out peer groups. And I am also a very pragmatic person. I think in the moment that we're in, we have to also realize, while America is awakening to you know, the systemic inequalities that exist, they've existed for a really long time, right? They're really baked in. And so I say to all founders, and I specifically even say to founders who are underestimated, right? That's the term that I like to use. And one of our investors, Arlen Hamilton, talks about, to build communities and build relationship and be as intentional about that. So process-wise, I do something like every Saturday. So tomorrow, I have spent the last 2 years talking to at least one founder who's behind me, right, or who's not quite where we are at, and someone who's already raised a Series B or greater, right? And the reason that I do that is, one, to, you know, really cultivate and learn more about the mindset of people that I admire, right? If I read a LinkedIn article, I cold email to this day. And he's not a Notre Dame grad, so he probably won't, you know, hear me say it, but someone that I probably won't say it, so you all don't go out and reach out to the poor guy. But a founder that I really highly admired, who's from where I'm from, shares the same background, you know, has built essentially bootstrapped a 40 million ARR business. And I just, like, I think 6 months ago, I started reaching out to my network to ask for an introduction to his network. And I looked up this contact info and I said, you know what, I'm just gonna reach out. And I apologize for the cold email, but I said, it's absolutely imperative that I talk to you. And I say it's important because it's gonna help you through those rough patches. But for folks who look like me and come from marginalized backgrounds, it's also going to be your Trojan horse. Natalie Molino has written a book called Leapfrog. And in it, she details how you have to be even more process driven about the parts of entrepreneurship where you're either cultivating mentor relationships, because those same mentors go, wow, like, Helen is building something here, and also the mindset that she has a mindset of an entrepreneur, period, right? Because entrepreneurs will recognize that in other entrepreneurs no matter what. I do have faith in that. And we'll say to X and Y VC, you should really take a look at this entrepreneur, right? That is not the total answer for bias. That is not an answer in and of itself. And I'm not using that as an excuse for bias, but quite pragmatically in the ability to build something that applies to everyone, right? You build community in order to sort of circumvent and really raise your understanding of what it takes. So I always joke that while I have a master's degree in education, my MBAs come in real time within CareAcademy through other people and just through having coffees. I encourage my junior employees, we actually sponsor this within CareAcademy, a coffee fund. I did this while I worked on the Hill. And in that coffee fund, it was a process by week where I said, look, people say there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's always a free lunch. I will provide that free lunch or free coffee. I just need to pick your brain. And that is the starting point of a relationship that I will then cultivate. So, and I will use my narrative, my first currency, right, to build and build and build. So that's just a pragmatic and very real answer in my mind. Certainly, that means that I have to also be process driven about pipeline. So even fundraising, even customers, I've built out CRMs, management systems around that, but cultivating a level of discipline and the things that you do over and over again, as unsexy as it is actually, I think also what I'm learning is the 20% that really leads to the 80%, if that answers your question. Brian, I'm like very long-winded. I'm a Nigerian long-winded woman, so that's what you're getting at me.
Helen, I think that's one of the smartest answers I've ever heard because, and maybe I think it's so smart because it aligns with how I think about the world too. But I think the process part of that answer is so important. Sometimes we think about entrepreneurship as this, oh, I've got to be so creative. I've got to come up with all these new ideas and I've got to think outside the box, whatever that means. And when in fact, most of it is to grind it out, put it in process, replicate it every day. Just like you're saying, every week I force myself to make a call up and a call back. And I do it every week. And we're the same way in that we say we de-risk through milestones the same way every time because that's the only thing that's replicable over the long haul, right? So if we look at this, I think that's so wise. Now, one of the things I'd love your feedback on this too. We're trying at the Idea Center to say, how do we connect maybe underprivileged, underrepresented groups to those mentor networks, to those advisors, to those people who can open up all of those contacts, right? In ways, to your point, that we can then nurture them going forward. What would you say to a Notre Dame student today to say, this is how you build that network? Is it just having the guts to make the first call?
Yeah.
Or is it, what do you think?
I think it is. I think it's there are implicit understandings, right, on both ends, right? And I'm very, I say this in my board meetings. I say this also to our advisory board and a number of other stakeholders with CareAcademy, right? It is the idea, and it's a mindset shift. So let's taking care of this thing of it is if you're building something that you truly believe in, right? And even in cultivating the entrepreneur, and building that thing, entrepreneurs are creators, right? Any good thing, anything that you've utilized today has been built by an entrepreneur and afforded by an entrepreneur, right? It is not if I'm reaching out to this other entrepreneur, I have to be, even though I apologize, it was nice about it. It wasn't as a matter of, oh my gosh, I'm taking away time, or I'm burdening this person, right? We have to put ourselves, no matter where you are, I don't care if you've raised any money or where you are, it is a privilege to be able to build with you and build you to go create the thing that everybody must be using, right? Zoom is a creation of someone, and our lives now depend on it, right? Now, given that, like every single person who helped Eric on his entrepreneurial journey to IPO to now being the tool that is the de facto tool of this pandemic, it was a privilege to build Eric Yuan and his company to be able to do this. So see it as, I've reframed a lot of my thinking about how people build with us. And I think it's giving yourself a little bit of that, it sounds maybe a little like, it's like, but seeing it as your birthright as an entrepreneur to reach out to people. And if people get it and are excited about it, they will come with you. And so I say that to entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented and underestimated entrepreneurs, because I think that there's also sometimes this sort of the need to be polite, or the need that I'm taking away, just to give yourself the permission and the privilege, right, to reach out. On the other end, in terms of our stakeholders, it is, it is wanting to build and cultivate relationships, because again, it's the opportunity, right? So I always make sure that when we're working with folks who, come at the margins, it's not I'm doing a great thing. You're building with the next Eric Yuan. You're building the next Zoom with someone, right? If not the check, you are investing your time. So getting into that sort of same mindset and cultivating from that mindset I think is also critical on both sides, right? And I also say to folks too, when you are building in community, it's also like the tools of building are, yes, your time, that's great, but also like if you see something good and someone's on the cusp of something, like be a pure opportunist, right? Write the check, right? And so that is something I've been also pushing folks onto. If something's good and it's going to take $1,500 to really move the needle, and tranche it, obviously do your diligence, but in that relationship is a trust that let's see what this person can do, right? And a permission to go out and succeed or fail, but learn at the same time. But I think I have a lot, and we can talk offline about that, Brian, but I have mindset changes before processes, mindset changes like for both sides before we kind of, go in community with each other.
Oh, fantastic. And I love the ideas about just testing some of these ideas and failing forward if they don't work. And we've got some of that going now where we're giving away money to students. And just like you said, small amounts, maybe 500 to 2,500.
That's right.
It just says, go test it. Go see what you can do. If you can do it, we'll give you more, right?
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to some Q&A. We have a couple here, so I'm just going to open this up. And frankly, Helen, I'm just going to let you, you can see this. Let's go ahead and take one you like, and let's address some of these, and maybe this will start a whole new line.
Oh, I would love, I'll answer all of these. These are amazing. Winnie Mangeni, and Winnie, I'm so sorry if I got your last name incorrect. How did your parents feel about you joining Teach for America? My dad gave me the biggest lecture, of all time, and I love him to absolute death, but I'll call it, was driving down the road, and he's like, why don't you just go to a teacher's college if you're gonna go to a place like Notre Dame and then become a teacher, right? But I will always say that if you, Winnie, and I wonder if you're considering Teach for America, the thing that I will say is, like any organization, I think folks are trying to sort of understand right now where Teach for America fits. But I will be forever grateful because it was my pathway to understanding education and the opportunities to really solve for parts of education or try to solve for parts of education. I said that in my first year, I probably learned more from my kids than I actually taught my kids. So I think if anything, it is absolutely true that you won't even recognize yourself, after it. So if you're considering, or anyone is considering, definitely do it. How did you go about creating your first team with CareAcademy? Winnie, great question. A lot of folks were the true believers, right? So they're people who were working full time, but wanted to help me, and I gave them projects, very discrete projects. As we started making a little bit more money, there are lots of articles too about creating startup teams, but the first person you usually need is a jack of all trades. So I hired a lot of jack of all trades with interns who helped me cobble together very discrete projects. And then as we grew over time, and depending on where we are sort of in our cycle, you up level, right, in terms of very, very specific people to do things, but you need a project manager or some semblance thereof to help you just figure out things, and that's just one person. And you go from there, is what I say. So great question, Winnie, again. Did you have any business partners when starting CareAcademy? If so, how did you find the right team? That's a great question. And business partners, the thing to really understand about business partners is like all relationships, folks kind of come in and sort of go. So I worked with one of my founding partners, was Dr. Maduri Reddy, and she came in and really helped us build the trajectory and really the vision around outcomes and health outcomes in parallel with the education platform. She is not full-time anymore with the company, but in having her, it was also having someone who had a mutual respect and a passion for what we were building. Now, in saying that, there are a lot of details to wrangle through, and I think what you want to be very clear about is, one, being able to have it's a business marriage, right? It's call someone a partner. And one of the things that Maduri and I did at the very outset of having her work with the organization is we founder dated for 8 months. We literally found each other on a website called Founder Dating. And we tried each other out for 8 months before deciding that there was going to be any exchange of equity or expectation. And I think that's absolutely necessary. So work with folks. Don't work with folks in the best way to keep it as clean as possible, free from equity, whether they are, a contractor, an employee, or what have you. But also know that over time your roles will change. And what we did was we set 6-month increments of time just to check in with each other and see what we each wanted. And I thought that was a smart play to just make sure we dedicated time to make sure we're gut checking. So that's what crew I would suggest. Founder date, and then have regular check-ins about really where you are. And Dennis Joyce asked, any advice on landing that first big commitment from a VC? Whew, oh my.
Long conversation.
That's a long conversation, but to keep it really great books on this. Y Combinator does a lot of really great writing on this. We are Techstars company, and also Techstars Ventures is back CareAcademy. Before everyone thinks about VC, but before VC is actually a step before that called angel investors. And I think a lot of VCs use this as an early litmus, right? And you depending on the angel and the size of check, the angels, and really great angels, will be actually able to introduce you and make sure you're going through the paces to qualify into obtaining VC. We've had one specific angel who's been amazing, and the well-known super angel here in Boston who has a lot of really great ties to the venture community. And as I've been growing the company, she's thankfully written a check every single time, but also has made sure that the company kind of did what it needed to do in order to really qualify for VC. So before VC, think about engaging angels, angel lists. There are a number of networks, angel community networks too, of folks who can really kind of write you the first check and really get you in and qualify the business. And then Danielle Coterbay asks, how do you envision scaling your company the next 3 to 5 years? Brian actually mentioned this, but it's all sort of based on milestones, right? Lots of great writings on milestones-based growth and expectations of growth. And I think ours, to some extent, really adheres and reflects that. So we are at this point, thankfully, a post-Series A company. And so that means and requires a certain ARR requirement. That also changes over time as the VC market becomes competitive. But in the startup world, you usually adhere to funding milestones, and that pulls back into revenue milestones as well as expectations of product and things like that. So in terms of scaling the business, the big vision that I have for the company is that the pandemic is showing us ways in which educating and deploying education and deploying direct care workers into healthcare is really going to drive everything, including our own business. And so how does CareAcademy, from growing from an initial platform that Helen wrangled together to now a platform that services nearly 250,000 direct care workers in 2 countries, really grow into understanding how healthcare is evolving, what direct care workers need to know, and really meeting them where they are, and so that they can be basically like the Swiss Army knives of healthcare, right? Because I think increasingly they're going to do that. And so we raised this $9.5 million to really build out products that enable us to do that on behalf of direct care workers and the agencies that they work with. And so I only see that in our future, we're doing that with much more complexity and sophistication on top of home care. There are other segments that are coming into the home. And so I'm super excited about that. And we're going to grow accordingly. And all the other things, I think, based on that vision will come. So that's just to answer that question, Danielle. Thank you so much.
That's fantastic. Well, Helen, this has been such a pleasure having you here. You said something earlier. You talked about Eric at Zoom, the CEO of Zoom, and Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. And I think at some point we're going to hear Helen Adeosun of Care. Wouldn't that be great? And,
That's amazing. Thank you.
You'll be that famous, and we won't be able to get any more of your time. So we really appreciated this opportunity to hear your story and gain from your wisdom and your insight and your experiences. Thank you for taking this time. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all for joining us today. Our history has been that these rallies really do make a difference on the football team. So we'll hope that all of your good juju will matter, and the team will win, and this will all will be a fun time together. We'll close this up by listening to the Glee Club one last time, and then we'll look forward to seeing you all at our next rally. Nick, take it away.
Rally songs of Notre Dame, sing her glory, dance out her fame, raise her gold and blue and cheer with voices true, rah, rah, for Notre Dame, rah, rah. We will fight in every game, strong of heart and true to her name, we will never forget her hand, we'll cheer her ever loyal to Notre Dame. Cheer, cheer for old Notre Dame, wake up the echoes cheering her name, send the volley cheer on high, shake down the thunder from the sky, what though the odds be great or small, Notre Dame will win over all, while her loyal sons are marching onward to victory. Cheer, cheer for old Notre Dame, wake up the echoes cheering her name, send the volley cheer on high, shake down the thunder from the sky, what though the odds be great or small, Notre Dame will win over all, while her loyal sons are marching onward to victory, onward to victory, for Notre Dame.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.